I grew up playing video games wherever I could. So this usually meant a trip to the arcade or to my friend's place who had an Atari. I was also friends with them, it wasn't just the Atari, but it helped. Or to the pub with my parents because there was Pac-Man there and I was really good at Pac-Man. Or when I'd go visit my cousin and I'd climb up into her attic and I'd play Donkey Kong on the Game & Watch handheld, even though we'd driven for 12 hours to get there and I hadn't seen them for 6 months. Getting a Nintendo Entertainment System of my own was life-changing, particularly for my mum, who quickly became obsessed with playing Super Mario Brothers, and my dad would yell out, "Are you guys still playing Bink Bonk?" Because that's what my dad calls video games. He still calls them Bink Bonk, and he thinks it's kind of funny that my job now involves playing Bink Bonk. This was a time where having a device for playing games at home was becoming more popular, but it was nowhere near as mainstream as it is today. Fast forward to modern times, and most households have a gaming console. PC gaming certainly isn't going anywhere. Nintendo are still making handhelds for road trips and public transports and cousins' attics. And is there anybody here today with a smartphone that hasn't at some point installed Angry Birds or Candy Crush or Temple Run or even that terrible Kim Kardashian game, which actually isn't terrible and it's okay if you like it? There's probably about 7 of you, statistically. But have you considered social media as a game? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they're all games as well. One of my favorite quotes about this comes from Charlie Brooker's documentary called How Video Games Changed the World. And in it, he describes Twitter as a massive multiplayer role-playing game where you play as a character loosely based on yourself while trying to accrue followers. So, Twitter is a place where we share news. It's a place where we go to see current events. It's a place where we find out what our favourite oversharing celebrity had for breakfast. Or it's a place where we connect with people in our industry. It's not all sunshine and roses though, with it also providing the means for horrendous harassment. You've got anonymity and you've got a sense of entitlement which combines to what most people know now as trolling. But I prefer to call it harassment. And I think the reason for that reveals my age a little. But to me, trolling is harmless pranks. It's, some fun to get a rise out of someone, but it's nothing malicious. Satirical websites like The Onion or sending someone a Rickroll is trolling. Harassment and abuse is harassment and abuse. So, if Twitter is a game, does it have the same effect on its players as a video game? Now, studies have shown that even with violent games, cooperative play, where players play together towards a non-violent goal, has reduced aggression and increased social skills, as long as there is that non-violent goal. So, for example, a war game has a better outcome on mood and behaviour than a game where you're just indiscriminately slaughtering people with no real purpose. The only time when there is a risk of real-world violence being carried out is when there is a predisposition for social disorders or violence. So, on Twitter, people play cooperatively using hashtags. They might be talking about their favourite television show or following a sporting event, or they might be using it for activism. Now, before I add gamers to Twitter, let's look at gamers. Now, studies have shown that gamers are in a high-risk demographic for mental illness. They display more depressive and social phobic symptoms than non-gamers. But before we start blaming the video games, let's look deeper into research surrounding them. We've got video games being shown to improve psychological therapy outcomes in 2/3 of cases. It improves it. We've got therapists using virtual reality to treat post-traumatic stress disorder in people that have been in car accidents. We've got people using the Oculus Rift, which looks like a giant pair of ski goggles, and you just immerse yourself in an environment. This is what someone looks like playing Oculus Rift, usually. That's being used to treat things like arachnophobia and agoraphobia and claustrophobia. One of my favorite studies involves kids that were going in for surgery, and they gave half the group anti-anxiety medication, and they gave the other half of the group a video game to play. There was the same reduction in anxiety levels from the group that had medication to the group that played games. They had the same effect. Now, although gamers are in this high-risk demographic for mental illness, over time, as they age, they show better mental health than people who haven't been playing any video games regularly. They start high risk and they end up better. Now, I've never spoken publicly about my depression before, but I feel like this is a good, time and place to do that, right? Now, I can personally attest to video games getting me through some really dark times. So that leaves open the theory, have gamers been self-medicating with games all this time? That was pretty hard for me to talk about. Thank you for being so... So this can explain why gamers are so passionate. For them, playing games isn't just a pastime or a hobby or something to kill time. For some, it's literally been a lifeline for better mental health. It's part of their identity, it's part of who they are. So when you get these gamers and you put them in the game that is Twitter and they start talking about games, they do so with a fiery passion. And you've got people over here that are advocating for better representation for women in games, better representation of people of color, of different genders and sexual orientations, and anything other than the straight white male that we usually get to play as. And then you've got the gamers that don't want things to change. They've got too much invested in the way that it is. And they will defend that status quo to the point of the most severe levels of harassment. Now, that harassment is unfortunately nothing new, but it is increasing from the usual yet still deplorable rape and death threats to real-life stalking, threats of bombings, and threats of massacres at events where feminist game critic speakers are. The game that these gamers are playing is a violent one, with a violent goal. And that, combined with the fact that they come from this high-risk group, means that there is a very real danger. But what can we do? What can we do besides block, ignore, delete, wait for the social media sites to, get their act together and do it for us? Well, if social media really is a game, why don't we play the game? There's a thing that I do on my Facebook page when I gain an influx of followers that I think probably know nothing about me and I should let them get to know me. I post up a photo of my son and I when he was 2 years old, and I tell them this story about how a little over a decade ago I was a single mum living in a retirement village because it's all I could afford. Lovely people, but it was a retirement village. I had $90 a week left after my rent to cover food, toiletries, fuel in my car, childcare, everything that I needed. I was surviving, and I was proud of how I was surviving. But I looked at my son and I thought, if I'm going to honestly tell this child that he can be whatever he wants to be in this world, don't I kind of have to show him that that's possible? So I took a path and I set towards achieving my goals. And it's taken me 10 years, but I'm in a role now that I always wanted to be in. Never hope harder than you work is the creed that I live by, and it's my advice to anyone that is wishing to follow their dreams. A funny thing happens after I tell that story. My followers see me as a person. They see me as someone that doesn't just exist online on the internet. They see that I've had struggles and I've worked to get to where I am. They see my humanity. Another thing happens, I lose followers. People that were only interested in me in a dehumanized state. People that were only interested in me as an object. And that's great. Most people are trying to accrue people, and I'm like, if you're like that, go. Because then I can put that energy into curating this community full of wonderful, supportive people where we can chat about games and tech and comics and cosplay. And I'm realizing as I'm saying that, most of you probably don't know what cosplay is, so I'm going to break it down. It's essentially adults that make costumes and play dress up. I dress as Wonder Woman. And we run around at conventions, and if you ever see someone in a hardware store with a trolley full of craft foam and PVC pipe with blisters on their fingers from a hot glue gun, you've met a cosplayer. So I discovered that it's the humanity that we have to be putting into our online profiles that makes the difference. That requires some vulnerability, and being vulnerable online is tough. I recently made a video for Medic. It's a geeky charity group that I'm involved in. This is our logo. And it was for White Ribbons Violence Against Women campaign. And in that video, I discussed details of my sexual assault at 15 that I'd revealed to very few people. I fully prepared myself for an onslaught of victim blaming, mainly because that's something that I still deal with myself about that event. It was honestly the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've made souffle. But I didn't receive a backlash. I received an onslaught of overwhelming support. I received wonderful messages from people that told me by opening up I'd helped them. And I gathered more of these wonderful, supportive people. And when I had them around me, I realized that's when you can speak without fear. When you've got that support, that's when you can speak up for change. But in order to have that support, in order to have those people that are saying, I've got your back, we've got to have their back too. If we see harassment online, we need to step in. Don't let those with the harshest words have the loudest voices. Sometimes it doesn't take much to reach down and grab someone and pull them out of the depths and give them hope. And together we can all work towards having a wonderful community and play this game that is social media with a non-violent goal. And to those of you out there afraid of speaking up for positive change, I've got one thing to say. That's, I've got your back. Thank you.